My parents emptied my trust fund to pay for my sister's wedding and called it an act of family generosity. I didn't cry. I simply looked at my fiancé and he rose to his feet. Your sister deserves a proper wedding, my father said with pride. My trust fund, my grandmother's money, $48,000. Gone, we're still the trustees until your birthday, he added. We have every legal right to. Did you just admit to felony embezzlement in front of witnesses? Beckett's voice cut clean through the room. He hadn't raised it. He didn't need to. Every head at the table turned to look at him, at his flannel shirt still dusty from the job site, his scuffed work boots. His calloused hands laced around a water glass on my parents' dining room table. My father laughed. Son, I know you're used to bricklaying money, but parents manage their children's assets all the time. Maybe if you made more than minimum wage, Isla wouldn't need family support. Beckett set down his water glass with careful, deliberate precision. You have 72 hours to return the principal plus interest, he said. If you don't, Sutton's wedding becomes a funeral for this family's reputation. My father laughed harder. My sister Sutton squealed in another room over something on her phone. Her fiancé Tripp filmed everything from behind his champagne flute, smirking. I took Beckett's arm and walked us out. I need to go back 18 months to explain why I wasn't crying and why my fiancé, the man my family had been calling a construction worker in a tone that made it sound like a diagnosis, was the only person at that table who knew exactly what he was doing. I'd been an architectural restoration specialist for 4 years when I met Beckett Sterling at a job site in Denver, a 1920s brick building I'd been hired to assess for preservation eligibility, and where he was apparently overseeing some kind of structural evaluation that I assumed at the time meant he was the project's general contractor. He wore a flannel shirt and a hard hat and had the kind of quiet competence that good tradespeople carry, the way experienced surgeons carry a certain stillness. Not performing knowledge, just using it without any apparent need for you to notice. We disagreed about a load-bearing wall for 45 minutes. Both of us standing in the same 6-foot stretch of a dusty basement before agreeing about the solution for 5. He asked me to dinner with the directness of a man who didn't particularly believe in preamble. I said yes for the same reason. I told my family about him 2 months in carefully. The way you introduce someone to a room you know has a low ceiling. My father's first question was what Beckett did for work. My mother's first question was the same question rephrased more elegantly. Sutton, my younger sister by 4 years, looked him up on her phone within the first 10 minutes and announced to the table that she couldn't find him on LinkedIn, which she delivered as though this were forensic evidence of something disqualifying. Beckett smiled and told her LinkedIn wasn't really his preferred platform, which was true in the same way that saying the Pacific Ocean wasn't really his preferred swimming pool would have been true, and which my family received as confirmation of everything they'd already decided about him. What my family saw every time they saw Beckett was a man in work clothes who drove a dented truck, answered questions about his career with phrases like project management and construction work, and whatever needs doing, and declined every offer to be impressed by anyone in the room. They drew their conclusion in the first 15 minutes of the first dinner and never revisited it, because some people update their models when new data arrives and some people don't, and my family had always been firmly in the second category. It was I'd come to understand a feature of a certain kind of privilege, the assumption that your own first impression was always more accurate than the evidence that arrived after it. What I had figured out by month 3, Beckett's specific offhand knowledge of hospitality acquisition law. The call he took on a Thursday afternoon in language that didn't sound like a contractor talking to a subcontractor, the way he read a room, the way certain people do when they've spent years in rooms that required it. I asked him directly one evening over takeout at my kitchen table, the way I asked clients about structural problems I've already identified. Not to perform the discovery of the thing, but because I preferred to build on foundations I actually understood. He told me everything, not defensively, not with the performance of a reveal, just clearly. Beckett James Sterling, CEO of Sterling Hospitality Group, a privately held portfolio company operating 137 luxury resort and hotel properties across North America, plus 7 in active development, plus an acquisition pipeline he described with characteristic understatement as moderately aggressive. He had built the company from a single property he purchased at 24 with inherited capital and expanded through 9 years of methodical patient work that looked from the outside like luck to anyone who didn't understand what 9 years of very specific, very deliberate decisions looked like from the inside. His net worth was a number I won't repeat except to say that the 10-year-old truck with the dented passenger door was a choice, not a constraint. He was private about it for reasons he explained without apology. He'd learned early that people responded to his money differently than they responded to him. And he found the version of people who responded to him, who argued about walls with him for 45 minutes in a dusty basement because they thought he was wrong and said so considerably more interesting and more trustworthy than the other kind. He told his attorney, he told his mother. He had not told my family because my family had not asked him a single question about himself that wasn't actually a question about his income, and the two things were not the same thing. I chose not to correct them, partly because it wasn't mine to volunteer. Partly because I wanted to understand who my family actually was when they thought they were in a room with someone they could safely dismiss. 18 months later, I understood them with a completeness I hadn't wanted. The first loop started 14 months before the dining room table when my grandmother died and left me the trust. Eleanor Whitmore, my mother's mother, was a woman who had made her money in commercial real estate, spent it with taste, and kept her opinions about her own daughter's financial choices largely to herself, out of a combination of love and long practice at accommodation. She left me $48,000 in a structured trust with my parents as co-rusties until my 27th birthday, 11 months away when she died. The logic being that she expected them to hold the funds intact for less than a year before I could manage them myself. A reasonable assumption about people acting in good faith. My grandmother, for all her intelligence with numbers, still had a blind spot when it came to her daughter. The first sign came at Easter, 3 months after Eleanor died. My mother made an offhand remark about supplementing Sutton's venue deposit with flexible family funds that could be sorted out later. I told myself she meant their own savings. I held onto that explanation for 6 more weeks because the alternative required me to believe something I wasn't ready to believe about the people who had raised me. The second sign was an email. My mother accidentally copied me on a message to the trust's custodian bank regarding authorized third-party transfers. The email referenced a verbal consent memo that I had no memory of ever approving. I read it twice. I convinced myself I must have agreed to something and simply forgotten about it, not because I believed that was true, but because it was easier than facing the other possibility. That excuse lasted another 8 days. The third sign was Sutton's venue upgrade. She went from a rented event space costing $12,000 to the main ballroom at Alta Aspen Resort, which I knew from professional experience started at around $40,000 for a weekend event. Sutton didn't have $40,000. She had a 12,000-follower Instagram account and a fiancé named Tripp who worked in something vaguely called brand consulting. I had also noticed he recently posted a photo of a watch worth about $14,000, calling it the reward for a good week. I asked my parents where the money was coming from. My father said Sutton deserved a proper celebration and that everything was taken care of. My mother talked about flowers, and once again I let it go. The pattern I'm most ashamed of in this story isn't what my family did to me. It's how many times I ignored what I already knew because the truth required a confrontation I wasn't prepared to have. The fourth sign was the statement. I called the custodian bank for a routine balance inquiry. The transaction history showed 3 transfers out of the trust, $16,000, $16,000, $16,000. Each transfer was exactly 6 weeks apart. Each was listed as an authorized disbursement approved by a co-trustee and referenced a verbal consent memo carrying my name. The pattern was immediately obvious. After 4 years of working with financial documentation in historic preservation projects, I recognized deliberate structuring when I saw it. The bank's internal review threshold for large transfers was $17,500. Someone had looked up the limit. I sat in a grocery store parking lot for 22 minutes, staring at the same 3 lines on my phone before calling Beckett. "Tell me exactly what you see," he said. I explained everything. He was silent for 4 seconds, the thoughtful silence I'd learned not to interrupt. "Don't contact the bank again today," he finally said. "Don't say anything to your parents." I'll be at your apartment at 7. I sat there another 6 minutes before I could bring myself to start the car. My attorney, Diane Ferris, had spent 19 years practicing trust and estate litigation from a Denver office that looked exactly how you'd expect a litigation office to look: stacks of files. Minimal decoration and no attempt to romanticize the work. She spent 45 minutes reviewing my documents before speaking. The thing I trusted most about Diane was that her silence wasn't uncertainty, it was analysis. When she finally looked up, she spoke with the same certainty Beckett always did. "This is a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum," she said. "Potentially fraud, depending on the documentation they used to authorize the transfers. There's a consent memo," I said. "My parents told the bank I gave verbal approval." "My name is on the authorization." Diane's expression barely changed, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "Did you give verbal consent?" "No. I didn't even know these transfers existed until 4 days ago. Then the memo is fabricated," she said. I nodded. She set down her pen. "I want to be direct about what criminal fraud prosecution requires and how long it takes. The memo is strong evidence, but because it's a verbal consent document and doesn't contain your signature. Your parents can claim you agreed orally and they simply documented it afterward." She paused. "Proving they're lying to the standard required for criminal prosecution will involve depositions, discovery, expert witnesses, and likely 18 months or more." She looked directly at me. "By then Sutton's wedding will be over, the money may be harder to recover, and your family will have had plenty of time to build an alternative narrative." "What about civil court?" I asked. "Faster, more likely to recover money, but even then they'll still have time to move assets if they choose to fight." "What's the fastest option?" She thought for a moment. "The fastest option is making them afraid of something more immediate than a lawsuit. Something that operates on a much shorter timeline than a courtroom." I thought about Beckett's 72-hour deadline at the dinner table. I thought about the patience he'd described, waiting 9 years for the right opportunity and the right property. I thanked Diane and drove straight to his office. Marcus Webb had spent 23 years as a forensic financial investigator. His specialty was uncovering fraud disguised as routine administration, the kind hidden behind legitimate-looking paperwork and carefully structured transactions. 3 days later, he presented his findings. 4 things, he said. First, the transfer amounts were deliberately kept below the bank's review threshold. That means someone provided your parents with that number, most likely a financial advisor who understood the system. That expands the liability chain. Second, the verbal consent memo carries a file creation timestamp dated 4 days after the first transfer was completed. It was created to justify a decision that had already been made, not to authorize one beforehand. Third, Tripp Johnson received $4,200 from the second disbursement through a direct wire transfer. He's a downstream beneficiary of a fraudulent transfer which exposes him personally regardless of intent. Fourth, the 3-transfer structure, the timing, and the memo's backdated creation all demonstrate planning. This wasn't opportunism. It was a planned scheme. After reviewing the evidence, it became clear that my parents had intentionally taken money from my trust fund and concealed it. Beckett was certain they would return the money before the matter reached court because he intended to make any other option impossible. For 3 weeks, I stayed silent and attended family events as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Beckett quietly completed the acquisition of the parent company that owned the Alta Aspen Resort, the venue for Sutton's wedding. My parents had no idea. On the way to the gala, I noticed Beckett wearing a vintage Patek Philippe watch, a white dress shirt, and Italian leather shoes instead of his usual flannel. When I asked about it, he simply told me to trust him and let everyone commit publicly before the truth came out. The gala was exactly what Sutton wanted: 200 guests, crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and a string quartet. My parents proudly celebrated their generosity, and Sutton thanked them without mentioning where the money had come from. Then I was invited to the stage to sign what they believed was a liability waiver. Before I could, Beckett took the microphone. He asked Sutton to check her email. Her face went pale when she saw that her wedding reservation had been canceled. Beckett calmly revealed that he was the CEO of Sterling Hospitality Group and that his company had purchased the resort days earlier. A screen lit up behind him, displaying trust fund transfer records, forged authorization documents, forensic reports, and the acquisition papers. In front of 200 stunned guests, Beckett explained that the transfers constituted fraud. Sutton and Tripp were immediately banned from all Sterling properties. 3 attorneys entered the ballroom. They informed my parents that criminal fraud filings were ready, but the matter could remain civil if they immediately returned the money with interest. Under pressure, my father transferred the full $60,000 using his savings and a home equity line of credit. The money was fully restored to my trust the following week. Criminal referrals regarding the forged documents remain under review, and several others involved have retained attorneys. My parents have not contacted me since the gala. My mother sent one email mostly explaining how much they had done for the family. I never replied. The trust is now managed independently, and for the first time, the money is protected. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. For now, I'm taking my grandmother's advice: read every line, know who's in the room, and take the time to make the right decision.